The body of a young child was found buried in a fresh grave on Staten Island last night.
The testing began to determine if this was indeed Jennifer Schweiger, the 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome who disappeared 5 weeks ago, last seen walking hand in hand with a local drifter.
Do you remember those over-the-top campfire stories that would keep you up at night? Well, I outgrew those. But this urban legend will haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. That's because it turned out to be true. In the 1970s, children of Staten Island were going missing left and right. Myths began circulating about an escaped psychiatric patient that was kidnapping children and hiding them underground. Little did they know, the true cause of the disappearances was even more frightening. Stick around to find out about the real-life monster infamously known as Cropsy. Welcome to the Truly Terrifying Show, where we discuss everything from scary stories to real-life monsters. We upload 1 to 2 times per week, so if that's your cup of tea, please like and subscribe so you don't miss any uploads. In today's episode of the Truly Terrifying Show, we will be covering the shocking case of Andre Rand, also known as Cropsy. In the 1950s, the Staten Island police deputy was awoken in the middle of the night to a shocking call. He rushed out of bed and flew down to the house of the Miller family, where he arrived at a gruesome scene. Of the 5 family members that had lived there, 4 of them were dead. All of their throats had been slit. The only remaining sign of their youngest son was his severed hand, which was found in the kitchen sink. Only 2 hours after the murder, police dogs were able to track down the son, who had fled deep into the forest. When they found the boy, he was sitting in a clearing in the woods, covered in blood. At first, they believed the boy to be a victim. It was later determined that the 10-year-old boy had murdered his entire family in cold blood and had sliced off his own hand for no explainable reason. The boy demanded to be called Cropsy. They sent Cropsy to the nearby psychiatric facility where he was to spend the remainder of his life. 20 years later, Cropsy escaped and fled to the underground tunnels of the Willowbrook State School. Over the following years, Cropsy would lure kids who were disobeying their parents or out past curfew deep into the forest. He would drag them back to the basement of an abandoned building where he would hide them. And the kids were never seen again. So next time, when you're breaking the rules, watch out, because Cropsy will find you. Although the story of Cropsy was originally meant to scare kids into behaving for their parents, taking a deeper dive into some of the factual aspects of the legend, we can understand how a harmless story actually turned out to be true. First off, it's important to note that the blip about the 10-year-old boy who murdered his family was entirely false. Instead, the real story began at the Willowbrook State School. The Willowbrook State School, which opened in 1938, served as a home for disabled children until it was used as an army hospital during World War II, after which it reopened. With its reopening came a sudden surge of new students. Although Willowbrook was called a school, it was nothing more than a warehouse for the developmentally disabled. Employers did not conduct the stringent background checks and screenings that they do today. Also, due to budget cutbacks and abysmal working conditions, just about anyone could get hired at one of these institutions. That's when Andre Rand comes into the picture. Andre Rand was hired at the school in 1966 and worked as a custodian, orderly, and physical therapy aide. It's speculated that he was drawn to this job because he spent a lot of his time caring for his mother in the Pilgrim State Asylum when he was a kid. Although at the time he had no criminal record, he was known as a very strange guy and people found him creepy. Regardless, up until this point in his life, Andre had lived a relatively normal one, but that was soon to change. Nobody knows exactly why, but in 1968, Andre's life would take a turn for the worst. Unexpectedly, he quit his job at the Willowbrook school and set up a camp in the nearby forest. He would end up living there on and off for the next 18 years. On May 25, 1969, police spotted a suspicious-looking vehicle sitting in an empty parking lot. It was the middle of the night, so they decided to check it out. Sitting in the back seat was Andre, and they could tell something was off. They asked him to open his trunk, and inside was a 9-year-old girl who he had kidnapped from South Bronx. Rand was arrested and pled guilty to sexual abuse in 1970 in order to receive a lighter sentence. He ended up only serving 16 months in prison before being paroled in 1972. That same year, Alice Pereira was playing hide-and-go-seek with her brother in the halls of their apartment building. Her brother found a good spot underneath the stairway and could hear his sister counting close by. Once she reached 10, she stopped abruptly. "Hey, you're supposed to count to 20, he said, but there was no answer. Instead, all he heard was a faint giggle, followed by complete silence. He waited there for a couple of minutes, waiting for her to come find him, but she never did. When he returned to the spot where she had been counting, she had vanished. There was an extensive police search for the girl, but her body was never found. To make matters worse, there was only one prime suspect in the case. The suspect was a paroled inmate who was doing maintenance work on the building at the time. This suspect was Andre. Shockingly, there was not enough evidence and he was never convicted. If you're a true crime enthusiast, you'll know that this is a pretty common theme among most serial killer stories. It's so frustrating to think that if the police had just stopped him right there, they would have been able to save so many lives. 3 years later, in 1978, 18-year-old Audrey Nuremberg was walking home from the grocery store when she thought she saw something moving in the trees nearby. She had been walking past the forest near Willowbrook School, a section she had heard a lot of scary stories about, so she assured herself that her mind was just playing tricks on her. She kept walking, a little faster now, when she heard something in the trees. This time, it was unmistakable. She turned around to see a man standing in the shadow of the trees. He was about 50 feet away, but she could clearly see his wide bulging eyes. She turned and ran, hearing footsteps following closely behind her. Audrey was never seen again. Andre was once again listed as a possible suspect in this case, but, you guessed it, he was not convicted. Throughout the next couple years, it's suspected that he was responsible for up to 3 more disappearances, one of which being a young girl named Holly Ann Hughes. It wasn't until almost 30 years later that Holly's disappearance would be tied to Andre. With his continued ability to evade police, Andre became bolder. On January 9, 1983, Rand, who was now working as a bus driver, picked up 11 kids from school. Rather than returning them to their homes, Andre took them to get burgers at White Castle before heading to the Newark airport to watch planes land and depart. This is where he would be found and arrested. Rand was charged with unlawful imprisonment but only spent 10 months in prison because none of the children were harmed. There's no telling what he would have done if they had never found him. Just 12 days after Rand was released from prison, 11-year-old Thais Jackson was reported missing when she didn't come home from school. Shortly after that, 22-year-old Hank Gaforio, who suffered from developmental disabilities, disappeared as well. He was last seen in a local diner with Rand in the early mornings of 1984. It's shocking to see how much Rand was able to get away with in such a short period of time. It truly baffles my mind how the police weren't able to see any of the warning signs. Luckily, this nightmare was about to end.
Drifter. Last week, police arrested 43-year-old Andre Rand, a convicted child sex offender, and charged him with kidnapping Jennifer. Now they want to know if Rand is connected to the disappearance of other Staten Island girls, and whether any more bodies are buried on the old Willowbrook grounds.
There may be other bodies there, we don't know.
On July 9th, 1987, Andre Rand was arrested on a serious kidnapping charge. He had been reportedly seen holding hands and walking with 12-year-old Jennifer Schwager. Just days later, Schwager's body was found buried in a shallow grave on Willowbrook's grounds. Andre's makeshift campsite was found just 150 feet away. At this time, he was charged with first-degree murder, but after going to trial, he was only convicted of kidnapping and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Years later, in 2004, he was convicted of the second kidnapping charge of Ann Hughes. With that, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. As a testament to the true monster within, according to some of Rand's fellow inmates, he brags about his similarities to serial killer Ted Bundy. He's even claimed to have said, "You know, me and Bundy are alike in many ways. We both used Volkswagens. Bundy's thing was women. My thing is kids." Although he was convicted, it's heartbreaking to know that there were potentially countless other victims whose families will never get the closure they deserve. Once this show starts to grow, I'd love to start a foundation to help out families of the victims, or something along those lines. So if you guys think that's a good idea, let me know. Thank you guys for watching this episode of the show. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, it really helps me. We also have audio-only versions on all podcast directories, as well as TikToks and Instagram. All you gotta do is search up The Truly Terrifying Show in the search bar. Thanks guys.